Good afternoon. Welcome to those who are still here and those that have hung with us online to listen to how assessments are going to be used in the new accountability system. So we are going to provide you an update today on the accountability system in the California School Dashboard. So we have a couple of topics that we'd like to cover at a high level, knowing that we are the last presenters of the day. Specifically, we're going to go over briefly the changes to state indicators, which again are based on data collected from each of our LEAs and then applied a methodology at the state level. We're going to talk about the participation rate. It's back. And then our alternative schools, how they're going to be incorporated into the accountability system this year, as well as identification. So for the first time, we will be identifying schools under the federal requirements. And for the second time, we'll be identifying districts and county offices of education for differentiated assistance under our state system. We will close out with some new slides that show the look and feel of the dashboard because we are moving to a brand new prototype this fall. All right, so to get us started, we're going to touch base briefly on the state indicators, which is academic, college career, chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, and suspension rate. For this year, we're in transition on the English Learner Progress Indicator. Of course, that's because we've switched to a new assessment and we need to have at least 2 years of data to even calculate status and change. So let's begin with chronic absenteeism. This is, of course, the second year that we've collected this data and through our student level data system. And so we will, for the first time, have a color assigned to it. The color will only be assigned for grades 3 through 8. We are collecting data on grades K through 12. So we will report out on DataQuest and to the federal government the data for all grades, but for the accountability system, only grades 3 through 8 will receive a color on the chronic absenteeism indicator. This, along with several of the other indicators, will need to be taken to the State Board of Education for final determination. Specifically, they need to adopt not only status, but change cut scores and our 5x5 tables at their meeting. So you will hear a little bit more about the rollout of the dashboard, but this is one of the items that is still pending. So what is the methodology for the chronic absenteeism indicator? As you can see on this slide, we're looking at students who are chronically absent who've missed 10% or more of their instructional days. That, of course, only includes, or rather the board has adopted a methodology that only includes students who have been enrolled for at least 31 instructional days. So there is a minimum attendance there. That's to help us with some of the fluidity in the system. For graduation rate, there's a couple of changes. First, we are pleased this year that we're going to finally catch up on our data. So for the first time, we will be reporting out on students who graduated in the class of 2018 in the class of 2018. We've always had a lag in previous years of being usually around the spring of the following year. So some of the changes that we made in response to the business rules that were required under a federal audit, we also were able to implement a report in CalPADS that now shows districts who were their beginning, those students that began on the cohort in their 9th grade year. So with that information in CalPADS, we are now able to pull it on a more timely basis and actually calculate the cohort in the current year. Some other changes is that we're no longer using a 3-year average for change. We're simply looking at class of 2017 versus how many students graduated rather in the class of 2018 versus class of 2017. We will need to take this back to the State Board of Education in November because we believe that we need to make some revisions to our cut scores. Now, DAS schools are treated a little differently, and we're going to go into a lot more detail about the alternative schools, but they are only going to be responsible for what we're calling a 1-year graduation rate or grade 12 graduation rate. So these students will have different metrics assigned to them. Like I said, we'll go into a little bit more detail, but they will continue to receive a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate on DataQuest. So we are not alleviating that responsibility of reporting out the 4-year, which of course we have to report to the federal government as well. And then we also have approval from the board, the State Board of Education, to look at a 5-year graduation rate and put it on the dashboard for reporting purposes only, informational purposes rather. So what we are looking at for next year is potentially including it in the graduation rate indicator. We have a little bit of work to do on the policy side and simulations to get there, but that is something that is under consideration. And that would only apply to our traditional schools. Our college career indicator is something that we've been working on for a long time. I think longer than I've been in the division, so at least 4 years, maybe 5 years now. It is something that it encompasses, we're looking at students' 4-year time in high school. So looking at the full breadth of their coursework and if they've participated in certain exams and so on and so forth. So we will have for the first time a color for the college career indicator. We'll be skipping ahead a year, so we're looking at class of 2017 data and class of 2018 data. We will need to take change cut scores to the State Board of Education. So this will be another thing that they will need to act on in November. And then for our dashboard alternative schools, so our DAS schools, the 1-year graduation rate will be used to determine who's going to be included in the college career indicator. The State Board of Education did approve additional measures to be included in the college career indicator at their September meeting. The first measure they approved was the state seal of biliteracy. And of course, to receive a state seal of biliteracy, there is a number of conditions that a student must meet. They must complete their English language art coursework with a particular grade. They also must ensure that they've passed the CASP English language arts examination with at least a standard met, and they must demonstrate proficiency in 1 or more languages, other than English, that is. And there's several different methods in which you can do that. And then finally, if the student's primary language was other than English, they must also demonstrate English proficiency on the LPAC. So with those conditions in mind, to receive a seal, the State Board of Education approved receiving the seal as making the student prepared on the college career indicator. The other measure that they approved was the Leadership Military Science coursework. So that typically is your, one of the examples we use of students that are taking this coursework are involved in the junior ROTC. So in order to demonstrate that a student is prepared under the Leadership Military Science, they must have taken at least 2 years of Leadership Military Science and received at least a standard met on either English language arts or mathematics. And on the other test, they would need to have done, they need to achieve at least a standard nearly met. So there is a testing component of this to ensure that the student, again, is prepared. To be considered approaching prepared, a student would only have to take 2 years of the Leadership Military Science coursework. Moving on to academic indicator, and this may be news to some of you, but we were required to put the grade 11 Smarter Balanced results in our academic indicator. So for the first time, you will see in the dashboard grade 11 results for Smarter Balanced, not only in the college career indicator, but also in the academic indicator. This was not the case a year ago when we spoke with you. This was a change that was made in order to make sure that we got our Every Student Succeeds Act state plan approved. So this was, it was actually something that was negotiated, but it ultimately will need to be included this fall. So we are doing the work right now with your data to make sure that we are appropriately setting cut scores and making sure that especially our high schools and our high school districts, which we know will need to have separate cut scores, that we can provide those to our technical design group and to others to provide us feedback prior to the State Board of Education approving those new those new status and change cut scores. We've done the work for grades 3 through 8, and we've, for our unified school districts, and adding the grade 11 results do not diminish the performance overall of a school or the district. So, so we don't see that there's a need to go back and look at our status and change cut scores for unified school districts. So similar to what I just said, it's now on the slide. I keep forgetting that. That unified school districts, of course, will have just the one English language art indicator and mathematics indicator. So it will not look like it's a separate results. You'll see the academic indicator the same as you saw it on the dashboard. This prior year, you'll just have to note that you now have grade 11 students, so you have a larger denominator than before. And then, as I mentioned, we will have the State Board of Education review the proposed cut scores at their November meeting. They're going to be busy, not only on assessment items, but accountability items in November. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jenny, and she's going to talk a little bit about the participation rate and the academic indicator.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm sure all of you are aware that the ESSA, that we're required under ESSA to include the participation rate in the academic indicator. So we had to find a way to factor the participation rate into this indicator. And of course, we are now referring to this indicator as distance from standard, which is different from what we referred to it last year. Last year it was distance from MET, but now we're changing it to distance from standard. And so the participation rate will actually reduce the distance from standard if it's not met. So if you don't meet the 95% participation rate for either the district, the school, or for student group, we will be adjusting your distance from standard. So I'm just going to go over, we get a lot of questions about this, so I'm going to go over just the few steps that we take in order to do this calculation. And let me just say, don't overthink this. This is really simple calculation. People tend to think, well, this is an accountability issue, it has to be complicated. And, you know, sometimes it is complicated, but this time it's not. So what we do is we're going to calculate for each district, school, and student group by subject area the distance from standard and the participation rate. If the participation rate is less than 95%, we will calculate the points that we will need to deduct from the distance from standard. And then we'll make the adjustment to the DFS. So I was going to do a little quiz on how to do this calculation, but you know, since it's at the end of the day and you already have a lot of information, I just thought I'd tell you how we're going to do it. So important to keep in mind that when we're looking at the participation rate, we are including students who take the California Alternate Assessment. So they are included in this calculation. Once we determine how many points away a school or a student group is from the 95% participation rate, we are going to multiply that by 1/4. So we have a little example here. So let's say we have Solar Middle School. Solar Middle School has the following data for math, and this is at the school-wide level. They have 18.9 points above distance from standard. Their participation rate is 79%. That means they are short 16 points. So we take those 16 points and we multiply it by 0.25. And we determine that's 4 points. Then we take those 4 points and we deduct that. We deduct those 4 points from the original distance from standard score. So 18.9 minus 4 gives you a new score of 14.9 above distance from standard for math. Keep in mind that we could have a school that meets the participation rate and we won't do any adjustment at the school-wide level, but that school may have one or more student groups that did not meet the participation rate. If that is the case, we will make the adjustment to the student groups that did not meet the participation rate. So it is very possible that when you look at the distance from standard, there will be some adjustments to some student groups and no adjustments to other student groups. So we will be providing for everyone the participation rate at the school level and at the student group levels, so you can make a determination if there were any adjustments made to those scores. See, I told you it was simple. So moving on to our dashboard alternative school status, as we refer to them as DAS. So DAS schools and county offices are going to receive a dashboard report for the first time in the fall of 2008. And it's important to understand that we will be rolling up the scores from the DAS schools into their LEA's dashboard reports. The only exception, of course, to that is charter schools. That's the same exception we have for everything else. Charter school data does not roll up to the LEA. Also important to understand, DAS schools are going to be held accountable to the same state indicators as the comprehensive schools or the non-DAS schools. So if they're a high school, they're going to be held to the same indicators as a comprehensive high school: the graduation rate, distance from standard, the CCI, suspension rate. So it's the same indicators. However, the Department of Education did ask us to develop what they refer to as modified measures that would more fairly evaluate the success and progress of alternative schools that serve high-risk students. And we have been working with our Alternative Schools Task Force, and we have also been working with our technical design group throughout the year. And we've only been able to address one of the indicators, and that is the graduation rate indicator. So for DAS schools, they are going to be held accountable for a one-year grad rate. We had to come up with a methodology based on the data that we collect in CalPADS. And in CalPADS, we don't know how many credits a student needs in order to graduate, because that varies by district. That's one of the things that the task force, our Alternative Schools Task Force, asked us to look into. And because we don't have that, we had to find another way to identify which students we were going to include in the grad rate. So we chose to select those students who are in grade 12. And the rationale for that was, if students are in grade 12, they should have the appropriate credits to be within striking distance of graduating. We understand that there are some districts that place students in grade 12 based on age and others on credit. But based on the limitations we had with our CalPADS data, we chose to go with grade 12. And districts will have to decide whether they want to change any policies in regards to that. So there's lots of requirements that we attach to which students we're going to include in this grad rate. We have a PowerPoint presentation on our accountability website. I suggest everyone go to that site and look at all the rules that we have there. There's also going to be a webinar on October 26th on the DAS system. So that has been sent out to all of our accountability coordinators, and hopefully you'll enroll in that and get all the details on that, because that presentation would really take about an hour in and of itself. So another question that we get often is, because we're making all of these changes, we're making a lot of changes to the academic indicator, we're putting in the participation rate, we're adding in the DAS schools, we're adding in grade 11, we've made changes to how we calculate the graduation four-year cohort. People are saying, well, districts are, because you're adding in the DAS schools, districts are automatically probably going to have lower performance levels, lower scores in all of the academic indicators, and we're going to be unfairly penalized for that. Not to worry. My staff love me, so they went ahead and they went back and did all the calculations for the data in 2017 with all the new business rules and including the DAS. So when we do the comparison, when we compare 2017 and 2018 data, they're going to have all the same rules, all the same students in them, and it's going to be a comparison of apples to apples. So we won't have that problem. So support identifications for LEAs under LCFF. So you know that we did identify LEAs last year based on the 2017 dashboard. We will be identifying LEAs again this year based on the 2018 dashboard. We are going to be identifying for the first time county offices of education. The identification is, of course, based on student group performance in each of the LCFF state priority areas. We do have one new local priority, that's priority area 7, access to a broad course of study. So that is new this year. And because we will be identifying LEAs based on local indicators this year, this is the first time we can use local indicators, priority 7, of course, will not be in the mix because this is the first year that you'll be reporting on priority 7. To be identified for local indicators, you have to miss that local indicator for 2 or more years. And so I just want to take just a moment to indicate what the criteria of met and not met means, because when you actually complete your self-reflection tools, you take it to the board in an open meeting and have a discussion about it, and you load that data up to the dashboard, you have met the criteria. And I'm saying this because we've had several districts and charter schools that actually loaded their data up and then indicated that they did not meet the criteria, when in fact, they did meet the criteria. So we just want to make sure you're aware of the fact that if you load the data up and you've taken it, certified that you've taken it to the board, you've met that criteria. I can't stress this enough. Please, 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 hit the finalize button. Because if you don't hit it, you're going to be counted as not met. And if that happens 2 years in a row, you're going to be identified for differentiated assistance. And really, I don't think anyone in here wants to be identified because they forgot to hit the finalize button. So please hit that button. We had more than one district that didn't hit it last year, so we want to make sure to stress that. Identification for schools. This is the first year we're going to be identifying schools for support under ESSA. And we have two categories. The first category is comprehensive support. And for comprehensive support, we have 2 groups of eligibility. We have the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. This means, of course, you have to receive Title I funds in order to be identified. And then we have high schools whose graduation rate is below 67%. This is all high schools. So it doesn't matter if you receive Title I funds or not. If your graduation rate is below 67%, you're going to be identified for comprehensive support. Comprehensive support is an identification that we will do once every 3 years. So what's the criteria? The criteria is that schools that have all red indicators will be identified. So there could be some schools that maybe only have 2 indicators because they only have student groups that 30 or more and 2 indicators. And if they're red on those 2 indicators, they will get identified. We have schools with all red, but 1 indicator of any other color. This criteria was put in through the negotiation process with the U.S. Department of Education. They were concerned that a school could have all red on the academic indicators and then have a green or a yellow on suspension, and they wouldn't get identified. That's why this criteria is here. Then we have schools with all red and orange indicators. And again, the last criteria, schools with 5 or more indicators where the majority are red will be included. This again is another criteria that was added through the negotiation process with the U.S. Department of Education. So schools with graduation rates below 67%, I believe that if you've read the ESSA state plan, and I'm sure you all have, we indicated that we were going to use 3 years of data and take an average. But because we had to change how we calculate the 4-year cohort rate, we only have 2 years of data with that new calculation. So we will be using 2 years of data and taking an average for this first identification. The other type of support is targeted support. Targeted support is based on student groups. So we're looking to see if 1 or more student groups for 2 consecutive years meet the same criteria that we just went over for the comprehensive schools. Okay, so we're going to be looking at 2 years of data, so the data on the 2017 dashboard and data on the 2018 dashboard will be reviewed. And we have been working quite a bit this summer to get a new look and feel of for the dashboard, and Cindy's going to come back and give you a sneak preview.
Thanks, Jenny. So in response to many educators, parents, and some editorials, we are redoing the dashboard for fall 2018. Governor Brown's budget in January included $300,000 towards this effort, and the legislature approved that in June, and then the governor signed the bill into law. So San Joaquin County Office of Education is helping us to implement this prototype. The prototype was developed in conjunction with an expert user design firm out of Washington, D.C. called Collaborative Communications. So we're really excited to be releasing this come November for our private preview and December for the public release. What we're trying to do with this prototype is make the dashboard user-friendly for parents. So things that you may have seen in the dashboard, like status and change report, or detailed report, or indicator report, those don't exist in the same function or places on this new dashboard. In fact, just by the homepage, you may see at a glance, there's less text. What we're really trying to focus the user on is getting into the website, so entering in a school or a district name to learn more about how they're doing. The other thing you may notice on this prototype at the top right-hand corner, rather, is that we are going to provide a state summary and a state comparison. So I'll point out those features as we go through a couple more of the slides, but we are going to be doing that at the state level for not only at the indicators, but also by student groups at the indicator level. So with this in mind, we're using a fake school. This is not an actual charter school. This is data that is made up. And in fact, when we go through additional slides, the data won't actually even make sense over the 2 slides. So I want to put that out there in the beginning so you don't get distracted. So what you now see is that we've moved away from our color, not our color scheme, but the logo. So we were using pies. Remember the pies? 1 pie was a red and 2 was an orange. And if you got a full pie, it was a blue. Well, sometimes in order to describe the pies, it took 20 minutes or half an hour, or you would never agree with the other person that you were having a conversation with about what the purpose of a pie was. So after some consideration, and we took this prototype out beginning of middle of July, and within a week, we realized this is still an issue. So we are now moving away from the pies. We're welcoming in the gauges. So what you see on this screen is the new look and feel of how we're showing color on the dashboard. You will still not see a summary. There is no summary color. Purple does not exist as a color on this website for measuring schools and districts. It's still red being the lowest performance and blue being the highest performance. So we're showing that by where the arrow is on the gauge. So if we're looking at English language arts in this example, the arrow is at yellow. You also see the label underneath it. So you see it in 2 different forms, that the color for that indicator is yellow. What we've done by landing on this page is provide a summary view of how a school or district is doing. We also are providing information on our local indicators. As Jenny just mentioned, local indicators come into play this year to identify LEAs for differentiated assistance under the local control funding formula. So they have equal weight to our state indicators for the first time. This is a rendition of what you may see. There may be some slight changes to an indicator card. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that the prototype kept in mind or kept at a focal point was that it would be mobile and tablet responsive. So we have cards for each of the indicators that are similar to this. When you're on a mobile tablet or a smartphone, they really line up nicely, so it flows really well. Excuse me. So the one thing about the cards that I want to point out is that at the top it says about this indicator. So what that will do if you click on that is it will flip over the card, It'll bring up a narrative about what it's about. So instead of sending you to a glossary on a far, far land, web pages away that's not user-friendly, we're trying to keep the user on the same website. So that is the intent of the About piece. You will see that on all the tiles that we're using on this new web page. You also see that the graduation rate has the grade span. We're actually removing the grade span from all of the indicator cards because that was also a distraction, especially when you're looking at academic. Why does it only apply to 3 through 8 and 11? Well, you don't even need to go there. You just need to know that we have an academic indicator and that we're measured on this at the school and the district level. So this is where the next piece is where the state comparison comes into play. So you can see the words all students, and it's highlighted in purple. That is the only place purple comes into play, I promise. We don't use it for any kind of rating. So all students is what is showing right now. If I were to select state, it would toggle back and forth between my data. So I could see, again, at a glance, how this particular school is doing in graduating students on time versus the state rate. And the state rate is about 82.7% for class of 2017. So for this school, they are doing worse than the state as a comparison. The other thing we wanted to do is introduce more parent-friendly language. So instead of using words like status and change, we're now just saying what it simply means. So for class of 2017, as an example, 78% graduated within 4 years. In fact, we had a discussion this week that we probably need to remove the words within 4 years because we are also introducing into the graduation rate the 1-year rate, right? So we have different measurements for our DAS schools, and we want to make sure that this card covers both situations. So what you'll see in a final rendition of this is probably just 78% graduated. And then underneath it, you see the change factor. So for this school, they declined from the prior year by 3 percentage points. So they've gone down. We have an arrow pointing down. And then the final thing on this card that is showing is the words Equity Report, Student Group Performance, and a series of cards. So the cards represent the colors that you can receive on the dashboard, the red through blue. There are now numbers in these cards. And this has been a point of confusion, so we still have some work to do on it. But what the numbers on the cards represent are the student groups and how they performed. So this school had 13 student groups. That is the maximum number of student groups that you can have under LCFF. Of course, student groups meaning homeless, our African American student group, our foster student group, our white student group. So we had a variety of student groups perform in different ways, and we can see at a glance that we had great comparisons, right? We have one student group in red and one in blue, and then the rest of them are falling into orange, yellow, and green. But that is what the information is meant to depict, is at a glance how student groups are doing. Now, the next question we always get is we want to see more data. And what we don't show you on this card, I think we ran out of room, is there's actually a link under there that says View More Detail. So we're going to go into View More Detail. And the first thing that we're going to see is a similar card to the summative card. We need to make sure that we're consistent with the language we put on our cards. So what is missing on this card is status. So we will add what the percent of students, how they did on the English language arts test. So this is something that is a work in progress, but just an overview for how this will look when you get into more detail. The other thing that you'll see when you move to this next page is you'll see a summary of how the student groups fell into each of the categories. And so from this example, you see on the far left-hand side under the red performance level, you see African American students, homeless, and students with disabilities. I told you the cards didn't match up, right? Because in our previous example, we only had one student group in the red. This one has 3. So they don't quite match up, and then total number of student groups at the top is 5. That's not the case, really. Underneath it, you actually have 13. So don't pay attention to some of the details. Don't get distracted by that. This is simply meant to show you potentially how the layout would look like. So the other thing that we're trying to show you on this display as well is that when you have student groups that don't fall into one of the color categories, for example, yellow, you would see the words no students. When you have student groups that don't meet the minimum threshold for the end size, which is 30 for both years, they would fall into the no performance color. For those students in the no performance color, you could see additional information as we move down the screen for those that are between 11 and 29. So these final cards are allowing a user to toggle between the colors on the student group and get more information. What you do not see on here that will be added, again, is the status, and we will add the state comparison to these cards. So you'll be able to see this, how the students with disabilities did not only at this school in this indicator, but how the state did as well. So looking at that. The toggle will also include the no performance color tab. It's not showing on this example, but that is something we'll be adding as well. So the rollout of the dashboard is similar to last year. We are looking at the same setup as we did for 2017. And for those of you that didn't have to live through it last year, well, welcome to the craziness over the holidays. So we are right now taking your data that your district submitted by the end of August in CalPads and for graduation by the middle of September, and we are processing that data. We are preparing it to be put into simulations for those pieces that still need to be approved by the state board. And then for things like the suspension rate that had no changes, we will be ready to roll that out the first week of November. So the first week of November, we will host a webinar in conjunction with that. We'll do a rolling preview throughout the month of November. Following the state board meeting, which I believe is November 8th, and their actions, we'll be able to load the data on those final indicators. We have not determined the webinar schedule. I'm sure that will come out over the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. If you are an LEA accountability coordinator, or if you simply want to keep abreast of what's going on in the accountability system. The local indicator team just recently is nearing the end of their Tuesdays at 2 webinars. They've done 5 Tuesday at 2 webinars going through each of the local indicators, so if you missed that, it is on their web pages, or rather on our web pages. But the thing to keep in mind that Jani already mentioned is that the submission closes for those local indicators on the 16th of November. And why that's important is because we'll then pull that data and use it to look at districts that we'll need to identify for differentiated assistance. And then finally, similar to last year, after your Thanksgiving holiday, we will publicly release the dashboard. Prior to that, we will also do a private preview to our county offices to let them know which districts have been identified, so there will be a contact between the county office and the respective districts on those that were identified. The identification under Every Student Succeeds Act will not happen until January, so we will not ruin your Christmas. You will get a Christmas, and then after the first of the new year, we'll be able to put that list out in a separate date. So with that, I think we're going to start with, well, here you have our contact information, and then we'll start responding to questions at the table.
Okay, I want to start with an easy question. When will the technical guide for the dashboard be ready or be available? I know you guys love that guide. It's, 130 pages of just riveting reading. The guide, of course, we are going to get it up at some point during the preview. Please keep in mind that we are taking things to the board in November, so therefore we can't put up the guide until all the decisions are made by the state board in regards to all of our cut scores. But as soon as we can, right after the state board meeting, we plan to post the guide. So we have a question for accountability. Do all students who do not test receive a loss score? And no, they don't. So for accountability purposes, if students do not test, we do not assign them a loss score in the academic indicator. How are participation rates of NPS schools factored into the district's results? So that is the non-public schools. So if a student doesn't test, they will be factored into the district's distance from standard. They will be counted as not participating, and if they bring the district below the 95% participation rate, it will impact their overall score. A question about clarifying with priority 7. So I am sorry that I've confused you. I just wanted to be clear, since priority 7, this is the first year that priority 7 is required for districts to report on. It cannot be factored into the identification of districts under LCFF priority areas.
So I have a couple. The first is, as a new dashboard coordinator, what role does the coordinator play in maintaining the dashboard? So the dashboard coordinator plays the role in submitting local indicators. They also have the opportunity to submit a narrative text. The text for the narrative is not required. It is an optional place where districts or charter schools can provide a very short summary that talks about their local context. So we had several districts that decided not to use it, but we also had others that provided that context. There is another question about when will charter schools be identified for TSI and CSI. So unlike our state system, the charter schools are not on a different trajectory for identification. Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, we look at every single school for that measurement. So they will be included this time around with the identification of TSI and CSI.
So a question about high schools and high school districts that serve grades 7 through 8. So if you have a high school that serves grades 7 through 12, what cut scores will we use? And we will use the high school cut scores. So that's only for high school districts that serve students 7 through 12 only, and for high schools that serve 7 through 12. They will get the high school cut scores. And there's another question about the grade 11 ELA and math and how that's included in a unified district scores. So what we're going to do is unified districts will only receive one ELA academic indicator result and one math academic indicator result. We're going to incorporate grades 3 through 8 and grade 11 so that you have one score in each content area. And the cut scores we're going to use are the cut scores that we established for grades 3 through 8. A question about whether the California alternate scores assessment scores are included in the dashboard for accountability. They are not. That is something that we hope to incorporate for the 2019 dashboard. They will not be included for 2018. We will report the results on the dashboard, so you will be able to get in the detailed data, scroll down, and see how many of those students scored in, what % of students scored in each of the performance levels.
So I have one regarding the graduation rate for a school that serves, I think it's moderate to severe students. Currently, 0%. Are they in DAS? I think they mean they have a 0% graduation rate. Are they in DAS? Will they bring the LEA rate down? So there's a couple things that I don't know about this particular school. I may make an assumption that they are serving at least 70% of students who are in a special education setting, and hopefully if they haven't automatically been qualified for the dashboard alternative school status, they would have applied to be put in the dashboard alternative school status, or DAS. And of course, Jenny covered that the one-year graduation rate applies to DAS. The other piece of the one-year graduation rate is that we are currently considering, rather the current approved criteria from the State Board of Education is that we look at things like whether or not they've taken the GED, or they have a certificate of completion, or they have an adult ed diploma, which is different than the 4-year cohort rules. So we are allowed some additional measures to try to get these students over the finish line. There may be some additional criteria added to the certificate of completion. That is something that we're working through on the policy level right now, but we will take any revisions to the board in November. DAS schools will be included in a district's graduation rate. So any information that is included at the DAS school will be aggregated up to the LEA level, and the LEA will be credited for their work. And there is potential that an LEA may also see performance go down overall. It just depends on a lot of factors, how many other schools they have and what the populations are of those schools.
We have a question here. Are we going to be sharing the 2017 DAS data before the 2018 is available? Nope.
Oh.
There is no way we can get that done before we do the release. We are working right now for all of our indicators, and we don't have the resources to share that data. So we apologize for that.
But once the data is available, it'll be put on our public website, and there'll be downloadable files available like they currently are for the dashboard.
Correct. We have another question about DAS schools and the grad rate, and they're wondering why we're not using the 5-year grad rate for DAS schools. So the 5-year grad rate, we are currently looking at incorporating that into the dashboard for comprehensive schools only. And that is because when we look at the DAS schools, we're looking at all their students in grade 12. So hopefully those students who are in grade 12 are the ones who have enough credits to graduate at the end of the year. And so we are not going to be looking at a 5-year grad rate because some of the students in grade 12 could possibly be students who are 20 or 21 years old. There's also a question about how long do scores for English learners who are reclassified count in the EL student group. I'm assuming that this question is for the academic indicator. For the academic indicator, we count students who are reclassified for 4 years in the EL student group.
There was a question about the new dashboard prototype, and I'm assuming this is talking about the indicator card, the baseball card, view more detail student groups, asking if we've considered including an overall card alongside the student groups. Part of the problem with how we've presented the slides today is you don't get to see the flow of the website. So the website does start with, for view more detail, the all student group, and then you scroll down to the student group information. So they're right on top of each other, and it tends to flow really nicely, but unfortunately, the slides today don't give you that same perspective. So that is going to be available in one location.
A couple of questions here about, well, we have one question, how will change be calculated for the academic indicator with the inclusion of grade 11? This year compared to 2017 with only grade 3 through 8. You might recall I indicated my staff went back and recalculated all of last year's data. So they took the 2017 assessment data and included grade 11 in the calculations so that we are comparing apples to apples. So when you see the dashboard, you'll notice that for the 2017 academic indicator, it won't match. When you see the change portion, it won't match what's currently on the 2017 dashboard. Are the 5x5 tables gone? Of course not. We are keeping those tables, and you will have access to them. It is not something that parents usually want to look at, so we didn't present that as part of the new design, but the 5x5 tables will still be available. And I have a question is DFS, distance from standard, the same as distance from level 3? And yes, it is. We're just giving it a new name. We think, based on the feedback from parents, that distance from standard was much easier for them to understand than distance from MET. Okay, I think that's it. I think we've answered all of your questions. We did have a couple of questions about the system of support. Of course, we don't have staff here to answer that question, so if you direct that, if you have questions about the system of support, if you could submit that directly to the staff at the department who are responsible for that, they can certainly answer your questions. And have a nice afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, Jenny. So I guess I wasn't clear when I attempted to answer this question, so I'm going to answer this one again in case this person is still in the room. So when students are taking the high school Smarter Balanced Assessment, they are eligible to take that based on their enrolled grade in CalPADS. So if you are enrolled in grade 11, you take it. If you are not enrolled in grade 11, you don't take it. If for some reason you skip grade 11, then you skip taking it. So hopefully that time it was more clear than maybe before. So I think that we answered all the questions except for someone who emailed me, and I hope I can catch you before you leave if you're still in the room. But thank you for everyone for being here and sticking around to the end.